to cope with it. And today we have the chance to host a former astronaut and a prospective one. And the whole idea behind the astronauts is that during training and mission, these people have to stay in confined spaces with a small group of people for long periods of time. And this makes them basically well-placed people to speak about the topic of isolation, hence the purpose of this talk. But just before continuing, I'd like to thank the associations and the organizing committee that was involved in making this happen. So the likes of VSCTH, which is the Student Association, the AVETH, which is the Association for the Scientific Staff, as well as the Mental Wellbeing Community, and the logo designer, thanks as well, and ETH Zurich for supporting this event. So the agenda of the talk today is as follows. We'll start with an introduction round where our panelists, Professor Claude Nicollier, will start us off with a presentation. He was a former ESA astronaut who flew in the 90s. And we'll then listen to Avgoustos Pantazidis, who is a prospective astronaut from Greece. And then the second part of our discussion will be the main segment where the panelists will answer questions that you've had the chance as an audience to ask during this past week, hopefully. And this will occupy the part of the discussion. Eventually, after this segment, we'll go live. We'll use a live Q&A. So, for instance, if you didn't have the chance to ask your questions during this past week, now's your time to do so on the live chat of the YouTube live stream. And if we judge the questions to be interesting for this talk, we're going to ask them. And on that respect, please, if you have, for example, a question and the likes of how do you go to the toilet in space, perhaps, these are questions that you can Google. So try perhaps to keep the questions focused on the experiences of our panelists here, or something that is more in the lines of the questions that are going to be asked during the discussion round. And after this will basically be concluded. We'll shoot for an hour and a half, but we have an upper bound at 2 hours. So we'll try to keep it short and sweet, but let's get quality out of this. So if there's no other comments to make, we can start. For information also for the audience, the talk is being recorded. So if you didn't have the time to join us, you can do so later time. Watch the recording. It's going to be uploaded on one of the associations for sure. So we can, I guess, start actually with the introduction round. So if you want, Claude, you can start and share your screen, and perhaps use a presentation where you can talk about your career path so far, and get the audience to know you if they don't already do so. Sorry, but you're muted, Professor.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here and to share some of my experience of space flights and isolation. Although the one thing I have to say from the start on, that I flew on the space shuttle on 4 occasions, and the flights on the space shuttle were in a very small volume. We just had the flight deck and the mid deck, small volume for 7 people, but they were short. And we'll come back to that when we have the general discussion. The duration of the isolation is one thing, and the volume you have available is another. It is another thing. And the isolation, although the one thing I have to say from the start on, that I flew on the space shuttle on 4. Okay, maybe let's start all the discussions afterwards. Maybe I'll start with that presentation. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, so you can start with your presentation and your introduction. We have a small muting issue. Rashmi, can you disconnect? Can you just mute yourself?
There's some background noise here. I'm not so sure. I will. Can I share the screen now?
Yes, you can. You can. Just the nature of these online events,
Okay. Okay.
Thanks. So
Okay, hold on 1 second.
we can see your screen.
Okay, do you see this coping with insulation, with
Yes.
isolation? Okay, I'm going to go, excuse me, rather rapidly through this. And I would like to be sure that it's a proper sizing, because sometimes on the first show of a PowerPoint, it's not properly sized. I have to recycle.
Yeah, we don't see the whole screen. So
And you see all the the letters on the left-hand side, all the way to the bottom.
no, they're actually a bit cut off. I don't know if you can.
Okay, let me recycle then. Hold on a second.
Yes. Okay, no problem.
How about now?
This is better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have, that's a problem I've noted a few times. All right. So again, I'll go rather rapidly through this presentation. It's just to give you an introduction into the job as an astronaut. Again, shuttle astronaut. You see me here on a spacewalk I did on the 23rd of December 1999. That was my last flight, about 20 years ago. Doing some repair work on the Hubble Space Telescope. It's a nice picture because you see I have my spacesuit, the EMU, extravehicular mobility unit, the US spacesuit. And do you see the arrow? My arrow. Okay. Anyway, I have here on the top part of the visor of my helmet, you see the Earth. So I was head down to the Earth with my feet in the payload bay, just about to take out a computer, a new computer for the Hubble Space Telescope from a container in the payload bay with the intention to install it on Hubble, which I did with my colleague Mike Fold in the following half hour or so.
Okay.
Do you see the picture right? And do you see when I point to something, do you see the pointer?
Yes, all good. Yes.
You see it? Okay. All right, just very briefly about my education, and I show here some ingredients of becoming an astronaut. Passion. You must have passion, obviously. If you think that going in space is boring, then you should select another job. Passion. I had the privilege of quality education here in Switzerland at the level of family, academics, military, a lot of supports, opportunities that became available and were taken not without risk from a job point of view. I was very lucky to be able to do that, no doubt. I was selected in the first group of European Space Agency astronauts in 1978, and there were about 6,000 applicants. And of course, you work hard in order to be successful, but the luck is a factor, and you can pull the luck towards you, and I certainly did that. But you must be lucky, and I was, and being crazy sometimes also. Again, it was an unbelievable privilege to work in such an environment. Of course, when you go up on a space mission, especially on shuttle missions that were very short and very condensed, you go primarily to do a certain job, but you do it in an environment that is absolutely superb. And this picture is an indication of that. In addition, you have weightlessness, absence of gravity, which is of course very pleasant. I had a passion for the sky, did a lot of astrophotography. This is a picture I took in La Palma, Canary Island, the sky. I always had passion for the sky, and I became an astrophysicist. That was my first job after studies in physics in Lausanne and astrophysics in Geneva. I liked cartoons, and there is a space cartoon that is very well known in the French-speaking world. It's On a marché sur la Lune. It was written and drawn in 1954, and I was 10 years of age at that time. That was before the first satellite was put on orbit around the Earth. Sputnik 1 was in 1957, but I always was inspired as a kid about such cartoons. I became, in parallel with my activity as an astronomer, I became an Air Force pilot, which in Switzerland was no longer now, but was at that time a part-time activity. So you were a dentist or a teacher or a politician, and then part-time, about 6 weeks per year, you were training in your squadron. So this is the beginning of the training in the south part of Switzerland, Magadino. Then during 22 years, I was incorporated in a squadron of Hawker Hunter. That's a fighter bomber from England that we used as a fighter bomber. For the ones who come from outside of Switzerland, Switzerland is a very peaceful country, but we have a defense system. I never was to war, fortunately, but we're trying to do ground attack and interception and things like that. For me, it was a very good part of my education because it's finally coping with machines that can kill you if you don't do the right thing. And that was the right amount of operational training. During this time, that was in the 60s, of course, the Apollo program took place. And for me, this was a fascinating adventure. But it was, of course, Americans doing this. And of course, Soviets were going to space also. And it became available for Europeans only at the end of the 70s by invitation by the US for participation by Europeans and by Canadians also. Of course, Apollo 11 was a huge source of inspiration in July 1969. And then came the shuttle program that was the following program after the end of the Apollo program in the US for space exploration, but with the goal to use the capabilities of a low Earth orbit only, not going back to the moon. Quite an impressive vehicle with a so-called orbiter, cabin for 7 people on top, pretty large cargo bay, about 15 meters long, 4.5 meters wide, 3 hydrogen engine in the bottom of the orbiter, but the thrust was not sufficient to take it up vertically, so we had 2 solid rocket boosters on both sides of the huge external tank containing about 700 tons of liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen also for these 3 engines. Going up to space was taking about 8.5 minutes from engine start until reaching orbital conditions. And here we are on orbit. Nice picture of the shuttle taken from a satellite that had been deployed from the payload bay. And that was a mission in 1984, one of the early missions. Then the shuttle separated from the satellite at the same altitude. And in a way, the astronaut took a selfie of themselves. They commanded a Hasselblad camera that was in the satellite to take a picture of themselves. Quite a nice picture. You have to imagine that the velocity vector of the shuttle is inside the screen. So it's like an airplane flying with 90 degrees angle of attack, but obviously in space it doesn't matter because basically there's no air. There's still some particles, some electrons and ions, but a very low density. That's a nice picture. This was taken on another shuttle mission in 1985 with Bruce McCandless, who did a spacewalk and used the so-called manned maneuvering unit to move away from the shuttle without being tethered. There was no cable attachment between him and the shuttle because he had the maneuvering capability in translation and in rotation. Quite an impressive picture. The shuttle was quite a complex machine. This is the flight deck. For the ascent, you had the commander sitting on the left-hand side, the pilot on the right side. Then you have 2 other crew members in the back in the flight deck. Then there was another compartment called the mid-deck below the flight deck for 3 other crew members for 7 total. But you see, it's very complex, a lot of switches. This is typically a cockpit of an aerospace vehicle designed in the 70s. First flight of the shuttle was in 1981. It flew for 30 years until 2011. But the cockpit was a cockpit of basically designed in the 70s, although there was an improvement with a glass front cockpit that was installed in the year 2000. But anyway, quite a complex machine. And that was basically the workspace in addition to the mid-deck below the flight deck for missions of typically 10 to 12 days. This is the aft cockpit. So this was looking forward toward the nose of the orbiter. But if you turn 180 degrees, you have the aft cockpit. And that was the part of the cockpit that was used mainly during the on-orbit phase. Typically, if you had to do a rendezvous and proximity operation with Hubble, for instance, the commander was flying the shuttle in rotation with the rotational hand controller here, translation with a translation hand controller, which we don't see very well here. Then the robot arm operator was using also a rotation hand controller for the arm and translation hand controller for the arm also near the pilot who was doing the flying toward the target. But as you see, a lot of switches, quite a complex environment. These are the 4 missions that I had the privilege to execute between the summer of '92 for the first one until December '99. And the 2 in the bottom were missions to the Hubble Space Telescope, including the very first servicing mission of Hubble in December '93. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You see the duration, relatively short time, maximum 15 days for my mission number 3. That was the crew for my first flight. Lawrence Schreiber, the commander, and we deployed Eureka, European Retrievable Carrier scientific platform using the robot arm. And then we tried to test the so-called tethered satellite at the end of a cable to try to generate electricity to the conducting cable with a copper core. And this cable cutting the magnetic field lines nearly perpendicular was producing a voltage between the upper body and the lower body. We wanted to test that. Didn't have too much success because we had a jam of the deployer after about 200 meters, although we had 20 kilometers of tether in the payload bay. So it was only a partial success, not total success. Some pictures taken during this mission, my commander eating M&Ms or Smarties that move slowly from his open hand to his mouth. Quite a nice picture. That's the cockpit of the space shuttle, the old cockpit. This is the early version with electromechanical instruments. But 2 of my fellow crew members, I cannot recognize them, but anyway, 2 out of my 6 other crew members are looking at the Earth through the front window of the cockpit of the shuttle. You see they have their feet up because there's no gravity. Basically, you can have your feet on the side wall or up. Each of the switches here on the ceiling is protected by metal loops, as you can see, so you don't change the position of switches inadvertently with your feet. The work and rest time cycle is divided in slices of 24 hours, so pretty much like on Earth, because we know it works pretty well on Earth. You sleep for about 6-7 hours. You wake up, you have about an hour and a half of preparation, then you work for about 12-13 hours. At the end of the day, you have another hour and a half free time, then you go sleep. And when we went to sleep, each of us had a sleeping bag and we installed it wherever we wanted, on the sidewall, on the ceiling. It's not recommended to sleep floating because you don't sleep very well. You need to have your head against some kind of a pillow or cushion. And the head has to be pushed by a piece of fabric with Velcro, because the head doesn't tend to rest against the pillow, obviously, because of the absence of gravity. Anyway, that's Hubble that was launched in 1990 and serviced on 5 occasions. I was on 2 out of the 5 servicing missions of Hubble. I won't go into the detail of the telescope. It's quite a complex machine. But of course, there were a lot of ambitions with the Hubble that was going to be a very high resolution imaging system for celestial objects. We expected of the order 1/20th of an arc-second resolution, as opposed to about half a arc-second resolution for ground-based telescopes. That's a primary mirror, 2.4 meter in diameter. Unfortunately, it was not shaped exactly correctly. So we had a so-called spherical aberration. I show it here for a lens, but for a mirror, it's the same thing. The outer rays had focused in a certain location, and the inner rays for the mirror, here it's a lens, but again, same thing, had focused in another location. So there's no place here where you put the CCD array where you'll have a sharp picture. That was the problem with a Hubble primary mirror. And that was not detected until the telescope was in space. Here you see the deployment of Hubble, 600 kilometers altitude, 28-degree inclination of the orbit, release of the telescope with a robot arm. Now it's free flying in space. And again, we had that problem with the spherical aberration and pictures that were not sharp. Anyway, it was foreseen to have so-called servicing missions of Hubble. And total, we had 5 of them, the last one in 2009. And the first one was 3.5 years after the deployment of Hubble to orbit. And of course, the main goal of that first one was to install an optical corrector to correct for the faulty shape of the primary mirror. We exchanged the solar arrays also. That the crew that was selected, basically 6 Americans and myself, 5 American males and 1 woman, Katie Thornton, very talented. And that was about a year before the mission. One of the first things we do when a crew is selected, we have the official crew picture, then we start training for about a year to accomplish this mission for about 11 days. That first servicing mission was 11-day duration. We did a lot of work in the virtual reality lab, but that was in the early 90s, not virtual reality as we have it now. The commander, Dick Cavey, Ken Bowersox, Katie Thornton, and myself. That's one of the potential spacewalking crew member being in a virtual reality, and I'm taking him to the telescope with a robot arm. So we trained or evaluated the way to do the repair of the telescope in the virtual reality lab. Then we did it in the water to simulate weightlessness, that the replacement of one of the cameras, the wide field camera, in the water for training, and that's the reality during the mission. We trained, as I mentioned, for about a year. Then the night of the 1st to the 2nd of December 93, we were brought with a little bus to our spaceship. It was quite a special moment, I can tell you. In the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, you arrive there at the launch pad, and you take an elevator up to this level. You go on this bridge all the way to the cockpit, where you get installed on your seat with the feet up. Of course, we are not sitting like you're all sitting now looking at this presentation, but we have the feet up. And then there's a countdown, and we had a liftoff at 4:26 in the morning. Destination Hubble, which we made a rendezvous with, and we were close to it 2 days after liftoff for 48 hours, and I was responsible for the capture of the telescope with the robot arm, and also in support of all of the spacewalks that we did. And then after capture, the next 5 days, we did 5 spacewalks, each lasting about 7 hours to do the repair work. That's the installation of the optical corrector by 2 of my fellow crew members. I'm commanding the robot arm. That's the last of the spacewalks. We exchanged the solar rays of the telescope. That's one of my fellow crew members, another one in the payload bay. Always 2 people when you do spacewalks. A beautiful view you can see here. We are over Australia, 600 kilometers, and you see Antarctica in the background. Black sky, beautiful. From a visual point of view, it's an absolutely magnificent view. It's even hard to work when you have such an incredible view. Oops, that was the crew at the end of all of our repair work with a new solar rays. We were going to deploy the telescope after this picture was taken. And only a few weeks later, we saw that the optical correction was good. This is a picture of Messier 100. It's a galaxy in the Messier catalog before the correction and after the correction. So the optical correction worked fine. You see here, HSCs for Hubble Space Telescope. WFPC1 is wide field and planetary camera number 1. And that the camera that was replaced later, and you see the pictures, is perfect after that. Mm-hmm. I was privileged to be part of the 3rd servicing mission, also this time as one of the spacewalking crew member, training in the water with a high fidelity model of Hubble. The challenge of spacewalking, that's taken from a cartoon. This cartoon that I was looking when I was a kid that inspired me very much for spaceflight. That's the kind of thing you want to avoid to do when you are spacewalking, just being detached from the structure and only relying on your safety tether here. That's a preparation for spacewalk number 2 for this mission, the 3rd servicing mission of Hubble, December 99. We are preparing for the 2nd spacewalk. That was my spacesuit here. This is my colleague's spacesuit. And we have here all the equipment we will take for that specific spacewalk. You need to be very rigorous to take out what you need for the specific spacewalk, because you go through the airlock, and once the airlock has been depressurized, to go back to the pressurized compartment takes a long time. Exit from the airlock, and then here we are replacing the main computer of Hubble. I'm here with my colleague Mike Fole. You see the safety tether here. You always have a safety tether, because if you are not tethered, you may be lost in space, and if your tools that you are using are not tethered, you may very well use them also. Tethering is a very important, strict operation you always need to do when you're outside. A little later, I'm here at the end of the robot arm, which changed the fine guidance sensor, pointing camera. That's the old one that was defective. And I'm installing the new one in the telescope. Again, over Australia, 600 kilometers. Nice view of the telescope just before release after the end of the repair. It's attached to the robot arm. Thin crescent of the Earth about 1 minute before sunset. Everything worked fine on that second, for me, second servicing mission of Hubble. In the program of Hubble servicing, it was the third one. We replaced mainly the gyroscopes. 3 or even 4 out of 6 had failed, and the main computer needed also a boost. That was the reason for this third servicing mission. Very rapidly, this is all the kind of celestial object that the telescope is studying: galaxies, cluster of galaxies, clouds of gas in our galaxy, out of which stars are formed, planetary nebulae, planets, and comet. I don't want to do a full course in astronomy here, but just to tell you that it's a very versatile instrument to observe all kinds of objects in the sky. This is a cloud of mainly hydrogen gas in our galaxy, out of which stars are formed. This is a very active region of star formation. This is the visible part of the spectrum that's in the infrared. A lot of pictures of galaxies and clusters of galaxies and so-called deep fields. Sometimes the telescope is still functioning well now, about 11 years after the last servicing mission. Sometimes it's pointed to a region of the sky, a small window where there's nothing or hardly anything. And after hours or days of exposure, you have pictures that reveal an incredible amount of galaxies, very far away galaxies. So we have learned a lot about the formation of galaxies, because we see these galaxies as they were, the faintest one, as they were billions of years in the past. So we learn about the evolution of galaxies and evolution of the universe as a whole. All right, ISS, we can talk about ISS later. Of course, this is a different kind of space mission. The astronauts stay normally 6 months on board ISS. So in terms of isolation, it's another environment. It's quite a complex spacecraft. It was assembled in about 11 years from 2000 to 2011. And that's the US OS segment with a US lab and excuse me, here, the USOS with the US lab here, a node, the Columbus European module and the Japanese module, and that's the Russian segment in the back. So this is seen from the front of the station. The station of velocity vector would be out of the screen towards you. And the big solar arrays at the end of a big truss here. These are radiators, which you see here. All right, shuttle over Zurich. I don't know exactly where you are, but you are somewhere here, I guess. That was in July 2005, taken from the International Space Station just before docking of the shuttle with the ISS. Quite a nice picture. At about 400 kilometers altitude above Zurich and the Zürichsee and the Zugersee, Alwilersee, Baldeggersee, and Lucerne is here with the Pilatus. Just a few words about the lesson learned from human space exploration. These are my own thoughts, not so much something official from NASA or ESA. Clear goal, discipline, work together at all levels lead to success. I go rapidly through these. We can talk about these later. Very thorough preparation and training, attention to detail, no stone unturned. Do not let yourself turn down by adversity. Fix the problem and move forward. We have very often adversity. You just need to attack the problem and reestablish normality and reach the goals. Learn from the past and apply these lessons. Determination and motivation, and that's a lesson from the Apollo program. If you really want it, you can do it. It seemed impossible to do this in less than 10 years, from the words of Kennedy in 1961 until 1969, Apollo 11, but it became possible because there was so much will to be successful. Okay, that's all I wanted to show in about a half hour. I took a little time, but I think it's a good introduction. Yes. I will stop the sharing now, except if you have questions and I need to show again one of the pictures.
I think we're going to have a live Q&A session if time permits at the end. So people are going to be able to ask their questions using the live chat, and we can come back to this later for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks for this speech. It's mesmerizing, the source of knowledge we have here. But okay, we're a bit over time, but that's okay. So maybe we can ask Avgoustos to go ahead and do his own presentation so that our audience can get to know him as well. And then we can head to the question and answer session.
Okay.
Yes. So if you can do a full screen. Yeah, I think it's okay now. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. Also, I feel honored and humbled to be in the same panel with former astronaut and Professor Claude Nicollier, who is a role model for me. So let me introduce myself. My name is Avgoustos Pantazidis. I'm a career astronaut candidate for a private organization in the United States and an analog astronaut. Some things about me. I'm career astronaut candidate for advanced exploration since 2019. Also, I have taken part in several analog missions as an analog astronaut and specialized in the mapping and sampling of the Moon and Martian surface and in the construction of hydroponic systems for space applications. Also, I am a project manager of the analog mission program of the Greek Newspace Society, which is a chapter of the American National Space Society in Greece. Last but not least, I'm a pilot in training and a scuba diver. As for my studies, I hold a diploma and Master of Engineering in Mineral Resource Engineering in Technical University of Crete in Greece. I specialized through my thesis in the planetary geology and more specifically in the identification of Martian analogs on Earth, especially in Santorini volcano of Greece. So I continue my postgraduate studies in the Agricultural University of Athens and specifically in the geological and mineralogical laboratory of the university. And I had the opportunity to deepen further my knowledge for recognition, the classification of meteorites, and for the planetary geology. Also, I had the opportunity to make my first steps in space agriculture. Finally, in the academic year of 2018 and 2019, I was responsible for the space agriculture development and research team based on the Agriculture and Construction Laboratory of the Agricultural University of Athens. And also I would like to mention that my career as an athlete, and I was a national champion and member of the national team of Mountain Pentathlon. I think that my path as an athlete helped me to develop skills and like multidisciplinary and devotion and discipline, which is important to meet the high demands of training and space mission simulation. So now some things about the space simulation missions that I have taken part so far. First of all, last year I was elected as the first Greek career astronaut candidate in the Advancing Exploration Career Astronaut competition. This company that is based in California, United States. This program is the largest and most comprehensive private astronaut selection program in the world, and it's designed to prepare candidates for participation in suborbital space missions, orbital missions, and mission to the Moon and Mars. So I have already taken part in 2 analog missions as an analog astronaut. The first one was last February. I took part in the mission. It's called AMIS-4 as an analog astronaut, ISRU and greenhouse specialist. This mission was conducted under the auspices of the European Space Agency through the International Lunar Exploration Working Group and the International Moon Base Alliance, and took place in the High Seas analog facility in Hawaii, in the United States. The second one was the mission called Endymion, which took place in the Lunares Research Station in Poland. In this mission, I was vice commander, and also was responsible for the extravehicular activities for the mapping and the sampling of the lunar surface, and also I was in charge for the biolab, where we conducted experiments of plants cultivation through the use of Mars simulation, Martian regolith simulants as mineralogical substrates for the plants growing. Also, I will be the commander of the first Greek mission in the same station. It was scheduled to take place this May, but because of the COVID-19 situation, it has been postponed. Maybe in the summer, July and August, we'll have the opportunity to the mission. Last but not least, last year I had the opportunity to visit Switzerland many times because of the Igluna project, Habitat in Ice. In this project, it was the Cyclamina team. Cyclamina is the acronym of the cybernetic plants, some cybernetic companion plants to mitigate insufficient interaction with nature. And this experiment concerns the development of an artificial interface between the astronaut and the plant in order to counteract the syndrome of inadequate interaction with nature during the long-term missions. So this is my introduction, and this is a list of partners that are currently supporting me in my effort. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Promising stuff coming up, and surely we wish you the very best in this endeavor of yours. So perhaps now it's time to start the main part of this discussion, which is the answers to the questions that the audience had prepared. We'll try to go in alternative fashion. And of course, if there are more space-related questions, they might be more targeted to Claude, but I will try to keep the balance going so that we can hopefully try to answer all the questions, but of course, complete answers are favored. So you can take your time to answer, and yes, we can start on this path. So the questions that we've had are basically split into off-mission and mission questions. So it all starts with preparation, and Claude, maybe you can start us off with the first question on how are you prepared on Earth, mentally and physically, to face isolation on a real mission? And have you been quarantined as part of your training? And did you have any coaches or psychologists there specifically for that topic?
Okay, well, it's a good question. I will first answer the part of the question, do you have coaches or psychologists there specifically for that topic? The answer is yes. So as I mentioned, I trained nearly entirely in the United States for my shuttle missions. And typically the so-called mission-specific training was taking about a year to a year and a half. And we always had psychologists ready to help the crew in case there was any, because the workload is quite high, because each of these missions is a really high responsibility. And we have stress during training, no doubt about that. But I have to say that during the preparation for my 4 missions on the shuttle, we never asked a psychologist to come and help us, because, and one of the reasons is the following: we are very highly motivated people. I mentioned passion as being one of the basic ingredients, and once a set of 7 people were assigned to a given shuttle mission with a pretty high goal and hard to reach, which was, at least for me, specifically as an astronomer, extremely motivating to go and fix Hubble. There is an automatic, very positive spirit within the crew to do everything we can do to be successful. And the distribution of the task was made within a relatively short time after the crew was assigned. So between the commander and the pilot and the so-called mission specialist, we decided who was going to be doing what. We were sharing the responsibility, and we had such a high motivation to be successful on the mission that everything was going quite smooth. Sometimes there were discussions but very rarely the voice elevated. And as soon as the voice is elevated, then we calm down and we discuss quietly, and we come to a consensus on the way to do things. And from a psychological point of view, it was always very, very serene and quiet and goal-oriented, so that really a psychologist was ready to help us in case it was needed. But at least in my case, on my 4 preparation for the 4 shuttle mission, we never needed psychologists. Now, the preparation mentally and physically to face isolation on a real mission, I mentioned that the shuttle missions were short, typically 10 to 15 days maximum. So, the isolation is not an issue. You are in a small volume, 7 people, as mentioned, but you have an extremely high motivation to be successful. So there's never any boring time, obviously. And I mentioned also, and I showed some pictures indicating the beauty of the scene, and also the absence of gravity is a very positive thing. You can use the whole volume and not only the surface of the floor. So there was strictly no reason to have any preparation for the isolation and for the, I would say, confinement, because we were 7 of us. The density of people, or the number of bodies per cubic meter, was relatively high, but there were large windows giving us a splendid view over the earth and the sky and the sunrises, the sunset. You have 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets per terrestrial day. So if you like those, and you look out the window at the right time, it's really beautiful. So there was zero problem with isolation, and also not so much with separation from people on the ground, because we had nearly constantly contact with the ground. We had sometimes contact with our families, although that on the shuttle time it was only once per week. But to be away from the family for a week, and then you have opportunity to talk to your spouse and your children for about 15 minutes on these relatively short special time for communication with the family, and then you go back to work for another 4 or 5 days, and then you come back. It's not a big deal in terms of being separated from your loved ones and your close friends. Now, about the quarantine, we were quarantined before the mission for about 10 days, and the idea was to avoid that we could get any bugs and get the flu or a cold in the few days before the mission. And everyone that we interacted with physically, the instructors and so, had to go through a medical check to be sure they didn't have anything. The family also, we could see, not the small children, that was not possible, but all family members beyond age 16, we could visit them if they had gone through the medical check. So that was the only quarantine we were subject to. Of course, no quarantine after the mission, because we didn't go to another celestial body. We stayed in a rather hygienic environment of the space shuttle. So that's about for question 1.
Yes. Okay, so maybe Avgoustos, thanks for your answer first, Claude. Maybe Avgoustos, in your experience, did you have something to add to this, or?
Yeah, of course. Basically, for me, that I'm currently in the process of preparation training, there is no specific training schedule that I have to follow before a simulation mission. But I try to prepare myself and spend more time alone thinking about the mission and trying to slowly adapt to the new daily routine to which I will have to adjust in the coming days. So about, and the other question about the psychologist, before the simulation missions, we had to pass some tests, questionnaires, and interview with psychologists, but during my daily life, I have a coach who tries to teach me emotional management techniques, including meditation, which plays an important role to this.
Okay, thanks. Sure. Okay, so it's really dependent on the timing of the mission. So if we actually think about, maybe Avgoustos, you can start us off with this one. There's a difference between what we're going through now, where we don't know when the lockdown measures are going to completely relax, and knowing that a mission has a certain duration. So what difference does it make for you, Avgoustos, to know the duration of the isolation you've been through for your mission simulations versus the current uncertainty?
Yes, interesting question. So, in my opinion, if you know in advance the length of the mission's duration and the length of your stay in a confined environment, if it is from a few weeks, like my missions, or to 500 days, which was the duration of Mars 500 simulation experiment, you have the opportunity to prepare yourself in psychological terms. In contrast to the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, in which we don't know exactly how long the restrictive measures will last, but also we don't know what the subsequent social and economic consequences will be around the world. I think that the pressure and the stress during the isolation is much greater for people because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So do you see it? How do you see it on your side, Claude? Is it the same or?
Yes, of course. We have to realize that the isolation we have now is very relative isolation. At least in Switzerland, you know, we have a partial confinement. I personally go out for about 2 hours a day to walk or to run. I live in the countryside in a small village, so I can do that. So it's really only partial isolation. I think knowing how long it will last is an important factor, but we never were in complete isolation, and that's a special case for Switzerland. I know that our neighbors, at least in France, are much more confined than we are. So on one hand, it was not a total confinement, and finally it was relatively short, and we are slowly coming out of the confinement situation here in Switzerland. Things are opening up. So of course, it depends very much in the quality of the environment where you are living. I have the privilege of living in a smaller house in a village outside of Lausanne. The weather has been rather good in general, and for me, I never felt that the confinement was very painful. What I was somewhat suffering from was contact with my family, with my 2 daughters and their families. But we use FaceTime every day on a few occasions, and they bring me some food also sometimes, because I'm in a age group such that I'm a person so-called at risk. I'm in good health, fortunately, but I'm beyond 65 years of age. But I never felt I was in total confinement. But I think knowing that it has a certain duration, typically on our shuttle mission, we knew that it was never going to be more than 20 days, because after 20 days in space, you die because you don't have any more oxygen in the space shuttle. So that was a very clear indication that it was going to be coming to an end. And anyway, it was relatively short. And again, the confinement that we have here with the COVID-19, at least here in Switzerland, is only a partial confinement, and we are slowly coming out of it right now. So not a big problem.
Yes. Okay. So it does indeed depend on whether astronauts have been for long in space. I think typically in the ISS they usually stay for maybe longer.
Yeah, they say 6 months, and some of them have stayed for 1 year.
Yes.
And that's quite long. I've been talking to Scott Kelly, who stayed for a year, and he wrote a book. The title is Endurance, and you need endurance. There's no doubt about that. And I think that there are 2 factors. There is the length of the mission, and there is a motivation. If we have people, we can talk about this later maybe, but if you go to Mars and it takes 7 or 8 months to go there, it's a very long time in a small volume. And outside, when you look out, you don't see any stars because it's always illuminated by the sun, so you don't see the stars. So it's a black environment outside. Yeah. It's a long time, but the goal of the mission is extraordinary. To go on the end of the mission, at least of the one-way mission to Mars, is to land on another celestial body, being on your own because nobody will help you over there. So it's adventure at its highest level, and it's so motivating. And I think the high elevation of the level of adventure is such that even though it's a pretty long journey, you'll stay motivated. That's my feeling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Okay, so we also had this question about family coming from the audience. You mentioned it previously that you can speak to them every now and then, but there's also, you know, this. Does your family itself go actually through any preparation, either during preparation, while you're on duty, or when you're back? Because I presume that you know, when you're off to a mission, I think the organizing body has to let your family know that there's also a chance you might not come back.
That's true. Yeah.
If not, maybe there would be some kind of preparation for your family itself, from the family.
That's a good question. In fact, I would say that, again, my experience is shuttle flight. For shuttle flight and flight preparation for shuttle mission, the most difficult part was really the final part of the training, the last few weeks, maybe 8 weeks of preparation, because it's very intense. And the crew members have their head full of the mission. You spend a lot of time in the simulator and talking about potential problem on the mission and how to solve them. You get a lot of training for coping with malfunctions and failures, and you have your head very full. So you are less mentally available for the family. For my family, it was quite hard the last 2 months. The mission itself, the ascent to space is dangerous, there's no doubt. And there was my wife was very scared of the ascent to space. Once you're on orbit, you feel very safe, and the family knew that. And we had this possibility of communicating with them every now and then, so that was fine. And then after you return, it's a big relief, and it's a happy time. And so there are these 3 phases. For my family, the most difficult was pre-mission, the last 2 months before the mission. During the mission itself, each of the crew member had a so-called family escort, who was a fellow astronaut who was taking care of the family during the whole mission, trying to solve all the little practical problem, go and pick up the kids in the school. The family escort would do this to help the the spouse. And if there is any interesting special part of the mission, typically a spacewalk, the family escort will take the family to the mission control center viewing room, will explain to them what's happening. So during the mission, the family escort concept was a very, very, very worthwhile concept. So to summarize, pre-mission, hard for the family just before going. Then the ascent is, my wife was totally scared. I must say, it was a very difficult time for her. The mission time is okay. And the family escort was a good concept to help the family, and post-mission is wonderful. That was a summary.
Yes, okay. Okay, yeah, incredible. I mean, the pressure if you're the spouse of an astronaut must be something else, I guess. Okay, so let's advance then. Avgoustos, maybe. There might be a small overlap here, but we also had the question if you feel the difference between the current isolation versus the one on mission. For you at least on the mission simulation, you said, for example, that in Poland you were for 2 weeks inside the same base. I guess you didn't really go outside; you just focused on experiments and so on. And I think the audience was thinking, do you have maybe some similarities that you feel again now?
Yeah. My opinion, even though the analog missions in which I have participated lasted less than the current isolation period, you said that was 2 weeks, both of them in high season till lunar registration was 2 weeks. The truth is that that in an analog mission, analog astronauts cannot go out to the supermarket to exercise or to go to the chemists or to work with their dogs are they currently doing in this quarantine. So they are confined in a small place with other 5 people who are not members of their family, and they might not know each other very well or not at all. And that means that astronauts need to have developed, I think, real isolation skills and need to have worked with themselves to deal with that. And the major factor that helps astronauts to stay positive in the environment is the higher purpose of the mission. I think that COVID-19 also gives a higher purpose, much like being in space does, because we are saving lives through this quarantine process. So it's important to understand that the bigger purpose is the more reasons to give you to continue to put up with this situation. On the other hand, common people are not trained to handle isolation like astronauts. They didn't have a choice, just an invisible enemy stuck them at home and change their daily routine. So the result was that a billion of people had to work remotely, and many people lost their job during the quarantine. So I think that this uncertainty for the future, because of this kind of isolation, brings more pressure and depression during the stay in a confined environment. Even if for me, because everything has been cancelled, so I feel something like different in this kind of isolation than in a mission, because of the uncertainty. Yeah.
Okay, there's a difference of uncertainty. Okay, so Claude, maybe if you have your own input, but to this question, we also had the thing you mentioned about being quarantined before you go on a mission because you don't want to bring germs from Earth into space, or because they want to make sure you're not sick when you go up there. And it seems like this quarantine just before the mission is more like the one we're going today, because you're actually, I mean, more in a confined space, and you actually can't go outside this time. So did you get a feeling of similarity between this particular time and now?
Yeah, a little bit. This was done at crew quarters at the Johnson Space Center, which was the base for astronauts and our training location. And it was a very special time because we did not do any more very intense training, because we didn't want to be tired going up to space. Until the beginning of the quarantine, about 10 days before the mission, we trained at a very high intensity. The idea was to get our head and our bodies also ready for the mission, but we had to slow down for the last 2 weeks. And we were at these crew quarters, which were very comfortable. We had a gym that was very close, so we could go out also. We could not go, of course, to the outside the Johnson Space Center, but of course we went to the simulator, we went to the gym, we could walk around and not interact with people physically. So there was some resemblance with the quarantine we have here, but of course it was very short, only 10 days. And again, there's always the idea, and Augusto mentioned that, the purpose. When you have quarantine or you have an isolation period of any kind, and there is a clear purpose, it's much easier to take. And the isolation we have now because of the COVID-19, there is a purpose, and Augusto mentioned that in order to avoid being infected or infecting other people. And on the other hand, you can have other purposes. I found a lot of other purposes, like teaching my course at EPFL using Zoom is something that I discovered can be very well done, and has even some advantages versus a course that you give in a classroom. I found the students much more interactive. They ask more questions. Maybe because they're not visible when they ask a question, I don't know. But so the purpose is a very important thing. And of course, the quarantine we had before the mission was on one hand short, and the purpose was clear, to avoid getting contaminated by any bug that you could imagine, and to have a little bit of a slowdown in training before going to space, because you want to be mentally and physically fit. By the way, we had the gym nearby. It was interesting because we were adapting our rhythm of rest and work to the day of launch. And typically for the first servicing mission of Hubble, we lifted off at 4:26 in the morning. We had to wake up at 10 p.m. the night before for the preparation, went to the launch pad at 2 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd of December, 93. So during the week before, during this quarantine period, we were going to bed at 2 p.m. and waking up at 10 p.m. so that you don't have the shift of or jet lag the day of launch, but we had it at the beginning of that week. So at the end of that week, with a special timing, we were fully ready in terms of our body clock for the day of liftoff. And it's funny because the idea was, if it is day for you, you have to be in so-called bright lights. When it was, let's say, I said we go to bed at 2 p.m. and then we wake up at 10. If you go at midnight, 2 hours after waking up, to the gym had to be in bright light. as if it was day for us. And this was helping us being synchronized with this new rhythm that we're going to have the day of launch. And the bright light concept was very useful. It had to be completely dark during the night portion from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. But after 10 p.m., wherever we were going, it had to be in a bright light environment. It worked good. It's a very useful system.
Artificial jet lag. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so now we perhaps wanted to see, the effectiveness of training. So we had this question about both on a safety and isolation point of view. Claude, what was for you the main difference when you went up there versus when you prepared on Earth as far as safety and isolation? Did you feel like in space you had enough confidence to execute what you were trained for?
That's a very good question. In fact, of course, NASA has a lot of experience about training astronauts. I trained between 1990 and 1980 and 92, 12 years, because my mission was delayed because of the Challenger accident and all that. So I had a lot of training time. And NASA has a lot of experience about training astronauts. And the idea is to train astronauts extensively for the nominal mission and for any kind of a failure or problem that we can think about could happen during the mission. The training was excellent, and the quality and intensity of the training is such that you don't feel stress, or there's very little stress, because you are confident you can solve nearly any problem. I remember during the mission itself, yes?
Even on your first time?
Yeah, even the first time, yeah. Well, because I was in an environment where my fellow crew members had flown before, and they were telling me a lot of things. Wow. And I have to say that during the on-orbit phase, the ascent to space, which is relatively short, 8.5 minutes, is always a little bit stressful, there's no doubt, because that's the most dangerous phase. But on orbit, we felt we are ready for nearly anything. Okay. And even for the spacewalk, the training for spacewalk was so good that I remember coming out of the airlock on my spacewalk on the 23rd of December 1999 to replace the main computer of Hubble and one of the fine guidance sensors. After a few minutes, I was looking out and I could see exactly what I had seen in the water many times with very high fidelity models in the water. And I felt completely at ease. Only there were no more divers and no more bubbles, and the view was more spectacular than in the neutral buoyancy facility in Houston. But basically it was the same, and I was totally confident. I felt I can do it. I was still feeling, Claude, don't make any mistake, but the environment is known and you know what to do and it's going to work. And I was totally confident. So good training makes you confident, reduces the stress, and makes it much more likely that you will be successful.
For sure. Okay, nice. Thanks. So let's go back to this question of Avgoustos of physical meetings and direct interactions. For instance, in Poland, if you had 2 weeks to be inside the space, this direct interaction cannot be replaced by texting your dearest ones. And how did you cope with this during mission in your experience in Poland? You had 2 weeks inside the space, but did you have the chance to speak, or how did it work for you?
This is a question that usually people ask me. So during a simulation mission, the contact with our loved ones was limited. And this was a moon mission. On Mars, it's much more harder. So video calls or phone calls were not allowed at all. So the only contact we had was via email, and during center hours of the day, 8 to 10 in the morning and 8 to 10 in the evening. On Mars simulation mission, it's much harder because there is a 40 minutes delay in the communication. So you have to, if you send an email, you have to wait 40 minutes for the response. So for me, it was quite easy to adapt to this program because I could read my emails in the morning as soon as I wake up and after the breakfast. And while I knew that after the end of the schedule, I would see the new message again. Even this routine helped me a lot to helped me psychologically during the mission. But indeed, the physical interaction cannot be replaced by texting your dearest ones, even if with not maybe a call or a video call. Physical interaction cannot be replaced.
Yes, okay. It's something we have to take, I guess, as it's part of the job, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had something to add, Claude. Maybe you did talk about your calls you can make on the space shuttle. I guess it was scheduled and.
Yeah, it was scheduled, but also there's a question of trust. The fact that we had this family escort, for me, I had total trust that my family was well taken care of. And of course, the family had could follow the news and could ask the family escort to listen to the air to ground. And again, this concept of the family escort was a huge help for the astronaut to be confident that the family was well taken care of. And of course, the family could follow pretty closely what was going up without talking to us, except during this short period that I mentioned. But they could track the air to ground, all the communication. They could hear me sometime talking, and they knew how the mission was going. And again, the on-orbit phase was considered a very safe phase of the mission. Very, we're just doing our job. It's a very interesting job. There's passion. We are in a magnificent environment. And my family was aware of the fact that I was happy there and I was doing something useful. And I had confidence that my family was taken care of by the family escort.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. This part of the family is interesting. We were wondering also more generally, Claude, if during a mission, do you take time for yourself? Basically, do you have time each day or week to just focus on yourself, just separate yourself from the job, the mission, and whatever you're supposed to do up there, just to focus on yourself and your well-being, or do you really just push through and focus on the mission the whole time without taking some time off for yourself?
Yeah, I have to say there was very little time where you are really on your own, and you don't really need it. At least I personally did not. Again, I had an extreme level of motivation for the goals of the mission. Fix Hubble, this incredible discovery machine that doesn't work. You go there and you go fix it, and after that it works. And it's something that you do as a team. And I did not feel I needed, again, you talk about 10, 11 days, it's not very long, but I did not have the need for much personal time, except when I was going to the restroom. but really from a psychological time for yourself, for your thoughts, not really needed. There was some, of course, when you go to bed and you sleep, you're on your own, you can have your own thought. Here, you don't interact with other people. But apart from this period of time just before sleeping, where I had some thoughts, obviously, I did not need much more than that.
Okay. And how about you, Avgoustos? Did you have some time? Did they allow for some time for yourself? Perhaps there's less stress in this situation. I don't know.
I think that many people will be able to answer this question after this COVID-19 isolation, because there are people that live the whole families in a few square meters, so they can understand how important it is to find some private space. So for me, when you are in a very small place with other people, the private space and time has a different meaning. I mean, you begin to appreciate the slightest amount of time that you are alone and enjoying the peace. Personally, in both missions that I have participated, I try to make the most out of this time, trying to spend as much as time I could in private. As for if you definitely push through and focus on the bigger picture and the purpose of the mission, and because there are a lot of activities involved, and there is a continued interaction with your team members that helps you to have a stable mental health.
Okay. Yes. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
This is another issue to solve. But the next question is really about length as well, but perhaps the short missions are less qualified for an answer. But the question was, after how much time, Claude, maybe you can start us off. Do you start feeling the effects of isolation if you felt them during a mission? Perhaps, of course, this is more relatable to ISS astronauts. But, you know, there's some dynamics, you know, when we started this lockdown, people were somehow, I don't know, interested in how we're going to have a new type of life. You know, we're kind of, everyone's part of history now, being into COVID, having been through this isolation. And everyone has had their own time to feel maybe the effects of isolation, depending on your environment, if it was a month or a few weeks or more than that. How much time did it take for you now? And do you feel there's a comparison to be made with respect to your mission?
Yeah, as far as the mission is concerned, after how much time do you start feeling the effect of isolation? In fact, I never did feel it. Again, there were short mission, extreme motivation and workload, and I didn't feel isolation. It is not a factor, I would say. And the fact of being able to communicate once with my family during these this mission, it was after 6 or 7 days once, and that was a precious time, but there was not a problem with this feeling of isolation being uncomfortable. I feel it's more now vis-a-vis my family, because again, we can communicate with FaceTime and we say hi. But it's been nearly 2 months now, and I would like to see my daughters again and their families. Mm-hmm. It's not something painful. In fact, we have plans, because now we are authorized to go and see the grandchildren, and I'll go and see my grandchildren on Sunday. Again, it's something that is formally authorized, and I will use that opportunity, and I look forward to it. So for me, this current situation is a little more painful as far as having contact with the family, because it's been 2 months now than on my mission that were typically less than 2 weeks.
Yes, true. Okay. And for you, Avgoustos, do you have anything to add to this part? As far as the dynamics of
yeah. No, so tourism, in the first days of the mission, there is this excitement that overwhelms the feeling of isolation. Personally, I started feeling isolated on the 3rd or 4th day, when I realized that I was now cut off the outside world. So comparing with the current situation, the transition to isolation has taken place in a different way, while citizens have not been prepared to all adapt to isolation like trained astronauts, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, that's
so it's also definitely different for each person, and it also depends on the activities or work that the person had to do while at home. Yeah. So I believe that if you have many responsibilities at home, then I suppose that time go by more easily.
Yes, I'd agree with this. I'm on my own, and so I felt them quite fast, I'd say. Okay, anyway, we can move on to the next. Claude, you talked about the relaxation of coming back, and this is with respect to looking to the future, because we have some lockdown measures, and in Switzerland especially, it seems like we're going to be one of the first to be relaxed to a comfortable level, I'd say. So if we had maybe some advice to give, how could we ease society into coming back together when the lockdown measures relax? But how did it also feel for you to be reintegrated into society, especially your first time when coming back from a mission?
Yeah, of course. For shuttle flights, it was not so much the mission itself, but it was the extreme high workload during the last couple of months prior to the flight. And these 2 months prior to flight with extreme workload, we were a little bit isolated from the rest of the society, just because we had to have our head full of the mission. And the mission itself was a short duration compared to this high workload of the last 2 months of preparation for the mission. So in a way, when at the end of the mission, when we interact normally with other people again, you have to consider that you have been a little bit outside of a normal social activity, not for the 10 days of the mission, but for the last 2.5 months, I would say. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
The last 2 months of the training are so intense, you don't interact with too many people except your family, but your family suffers a little bit because you have the mission in your head, and you interact with the instructors and
So the isolation is actually before the mission and not during the mission.
yeah, not before the mission. And of course, as far as what will happen now when we slowly return to normal, what is interesting, and we'll see what happens, but it's going to be a slow return. I normally travel a lot. I teach during the spring semester, and I have a lot of journeys in the fall, mainly in South America, where I'm a guide, and I had a few trips planned, including total solar eclipse on the 14th of December. And now they tell us that probably we will not be able to go out of the country, except maybe in some countries in Europe, but the United States and South America, maybe in 2021. So this slow return to normal as far as ability to travel, it's something that I will suffer from because I like to travel a lot. Yes. And I will not be able to. So interact with people around me and the family, and then students locally, and maybe go to the mountain a little bit with some friends, keeping some distance. But it's going to be a very slow return, and the long journey is only next year. And I must say, I suffer from that because that's contrary to what I like to do and I'm used to do.
Okay. So I was thinking on that respect, I know from my own family circle that if you want to travel, a good place to go is Antarctica now.
Well, but you probably cannot do this for quite a while because you need to go to South America, to Argentina, to Ushuaia, and it's probably not going to be possible until late this year or maybe next year.
Okay, that's something to think about for the ones who want to go there. Okay, thanks. And you, Avgoustos, do you have something to add maybe to this relaxation issue? Do you have something in mind about how you're going to get back into society, however the governments decide to ease us back into it?
Yeah, my first mission during my first mission in Lunares research station in Poland, we were totally confined. Even the EVA activities which took place under a huge tent. So according to my experience so far, I would say that the moment that the mission adds the feeling, for example, when you smell a flower for first time in a long time and the wind hits you on the face is unique. As for the interaction with other people after the mission, I would say that after the first simulation mission in Poland, I will not hide from you that while we developed a strong bond with the rest members of the crew, the joy of seeing my loved one again was was great. So to easy transition into society when the lockdown measures relax, I think that this surely take time to get used to the new reality in psychological terms. I mean that the transition will not be one-off, but will come step by step. For people like in Greece right now, 1 week ago, we could not go anywhere without to send a message and to say the purpose of our EVA. But now we have to can go outside, but we have to be careful and to wear a mask. So this is we try to come back to the normal life step by step.
Yes. Okay. So it's certainly more relaxed than what you guys have been through. I mean, we can always call people and speak outside when we go out. But there's perhaps a component of seeing the people you used to see that is there now. It's going to change when the measures go down. Okay, so maybe a more astronaut-related question. As far as training goes, I don't know if either of you can start on this. Maybe Claude. Do you see there's a difference in astronaut training then and now, as far as isolation at least goes, or maybe something else? Because it seems these days that astronaut training is more focused also on isolation in my mind, because they're always talking about these missions of colonizing the moon and colonizing Mars. And if you go there, it's certainly not going to be for 15 days. So we were wondering, is there a difference? Do they add more of this isolation component in your eyes into their training? Because this colony idea is, for staying 1, 2, I don't know how many years there, because of course missions are expensive and so on and so forth. So you see a difference?
Yeah, of course, I have the shuttle experience, and astronaut training was training about the technical aspect and the engineering aspect and the science and the operational aspect. And isolation was not even talked about because, again, we knew we were going to be in a small environment during typically 10, 11, 12 days, except that we could go out sometimes for the spacewalks by definition. It's like now during the confinement, when we go out, in many cases, we need to have a mask. When you go spacewalking, we had a mask also, even more than just a mask. Of course, the training, so this isolation aspect and training were totally separated. We trained for shuttle flight from a technical, operational, and scientific point of view. Isolation was not even a factor.
Yes,
for people who go to the International Space Station, I don't know exactly if they have any training about this isolation aspect. You have on the station for typically 6 months. I cannot really speak about that. For the ones who will go to Mars, that's going to be much more difficult because, again, it's going to be a long journey, far from Earth and far from Mars. After a few days, the Earth will be a very small celestial body. After 3 days, going to be like the Apollo astronauts were seeing the Earth, and it still is beautiful and interesting. But after 1 week and 2 weeks, it's going to be small. Well, a relatively bright object, a blue object in the sky, and Mars will be a very small red dot, and it's going to take months and months until you are close to Mars, and it's going to be from a visual point of view interesting to look at Mars and the landing spot. So from a visual point of view, and visual aspect is a very important factor. On ISS, you have the Earth, you have the cupola, and the cupola is a place where astronauts love to go when they don't work because they see the Earth and it's fascinating. Yeah. So the isolation is made much easier in the station because you have these large window to the Earth and also to the sky when you are in the eclipse, when you're on the night portion of the Earth, where you see the stars and the moon and the planets, and it's beautiful. The tough part about isolation for a long time will be going to Mars. There's no doubt about that. For us, for shuttle, it was not a factor. For ISS, it's not too big a factor for 6 months. For Mars, it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, so I think there's actually a lot of learning experience for society also for going through this isolation. And that's what I've heard left and right about these challenges of staying on your own for so many weeks for money, or just being to sleep as much as possible for whatever reason. And yeah, it seems to be interesting that there's a gradient and an evolution in the way astronauts are trained now, because missions seem to evolve into being more long-term than before. Okay, yes. So Avgoustos, if you have anything to add, or perhaps not, because it seems that you're going to be the one who's going to be subject to this isolation training. But as you wish.
Again, isolation with a clear and fascinating goal is much easier to take than isolation in boredom.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Maybe the main takeaway. Okay, so maybe we can have this last question focused, maybe because we're in a student organization, part of the university. This is part of ETH and all these associations. We had this last question on, given all of your experiences, what advice can you give to students studying at home during this interesting period? Maybe Avgoustos, do you have your piece of advice for us? We
as a
have
student.
exams in a month here, and in Zurich we also have the privilege to have exams in the middle of August. So what do you think of this?
Yeah, I'm a student too, so I think that for us to remain our psychological balance at high levels, because of this uncertainty of the exams. For example, in Greece, we don't know, the students that do not know yet when the exams will take place. I think that we have to understand the purpose again of the situation, and actually the risk that us, our family, and our friends are facing right now. We have to identify what is the objective of the mission and what we have to accomplish during the mission. So when we can also thinking a positive and productive way, for example, to keep track of productive things that we accomplish each day, and it's a unique chance to do something different that we haven't maybe tried before, like to start a new project or to learn something that we always wanted to learn. For example, for me, COVID-19 isolation was an incredible chance to revise my Russian language skills. Yeah, so that's my advice.
And you, Claude, maybe as a professor, do you have something for your students to add to this? You are muted, Claude. I think we don't.
Sorry. Yeah, I think in general, what is important is to have a plan for your days. The best thing is to think the day before, the night before, what am I going to do next day, and have a plan. You don't want to work all the time, of course, but have some period where you work. If you have motivation for the subject of the exam, then you want to be successful, and you want to devote some time when you will study and try to get to a level of knowledge such that you are pretty sure you are going to have a good grade at the exam. Communicate with people. Again, talking about FaceTime, communicate with your friends, with your family members. I think it's useful. And I think sometimes do things that are fun, do some experiments in cooking. I've been doing this myself here. And I've been using quite a lot of time looking at the sky in the evening. We had beautiful days. We had, we have Venus in the evening sky. We had Venus crossing the Pleiades. That was at the beginning of April, or the 3rd of April. I took some pictures of that. We had a beautiful view of the moon with this thin crescent close to Venus. In the morning, we have Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn together just about 45 minutes before sunrise. So have this little project to do things that you normally don't do, although I personally observe the sky nearly all the time, but they were very, very striking and beautiful phenomena in the evening and in the morning, and try to take pictures, which is not easy. These are the recommendations, but have a plan, I think, is important. Yeah, I'm a professor, and I have my student who will take the examination at the beginning of August, from the 3rd to the 10th of August. And I organize some sessions where we review the content of the course so that they can increase their knowledge on the subject of the course and be more likely to be successful on the exam. I think I try to keep interaction with the students. I plan to do this until late July, so as to bring them to a good level of preparation to be successful at the exam. But in general, I think this idea, have a plan, communicate, and do things that are fun in cooking and looking at the sky. These are my recommendations.
Okay, this is the name of the game for you. Okay, so thanks a lot. We've been through actually all of the questions, but the live Q&A has generated quite a few of them. So I'll just check quickly here what we have. Using the live chat, we have our moderator asking questions.
Do you use the chat function, or can we get there? Or?
I'm gonna basically, the moderator has already picked the questions for us, and I'm going through them to basically scan, and then I'll just ask them. So
but can we have the question listed on a page? That's even better than handling them only verbally. Can you share with us the sheet with the questions?
Yes, I can share my screen now. Let's go with number 1. Let me just check the here. I think. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen now, and here we go.
Okay, I see that, yeah.
The first one, I'm not sure. Well, these questions were generated now, so we'll see what happens. It says, who or what do you think of during isolation, beside details related to your job space mission? Is there something like music, reading, or sports that helps you most throughout the training and missions? Maybe Avgoustos, can you start us off with this one?
Yes, of course. During the mission, I used to work out at least 2 hours per day. So that's helped me to manage my mental health and my psychological statement during the mission. And also day per day, we had movie nights with the rest of the crew. That's
Okay.
part of the fun part of the mission, that we had the chance to interact each other and to watch something all together. This is the basic things that I did during my daily routine in the mission, besides the work and experiments and the EV activities that we had to perform.
Okay, sure. Okay. And for you, Claude, maybe apart from the mission, you're up there, you're focused on the mission, but is there anything else that occupies you during these days?
Yeah, in fact, during the preparation, sports is an important factor. And even now during the confinement, I personally go out at least an hour and a half per day outside and walk and run in the forest and in the fields close to my village. So physical activity is really important, not only from the physical point of view, but mental point of view as well. As far as music is concerned, there's some music that I like a lot. And we could take, it was limited, but we could take 5 CDs. At that time, it was CDs.
Yeah.
And I was taking my favorite music, and I was listening to music just before sleeping. During the typical day, the 12, 13 hours of a work day with going 8 times around the Earth, no music because we're fully immersed in operation to do what was expected from us, fixing Hubble. And during a spacewalk, you don't listen to music. You just support the spacewalk. You do it and you are outside, or you support it from inside, but not much time for music or reading. But when you are more relaxed before sleeping, I was always listening to some music.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So there's also this physical component of having actually to train. Otherwise, your muscles would not be able to keep up because you don't have to hold your body, I think, anymore when you're up there. Okay, so let's head on to question 2, which is more effective for resilience. Okay, this is a question, I guess, of discipline. If, perhaps extending beyond the mission, when you chase this career of being an astronaut, maybe also very relevant for Avgoustos, which is more effective for resilience, i.e., which is more gonna let you keep yourself on track? Is it the motivation throughout the years of trying to stay on course, or did you have well-designed routines? And how has the amount of passion and motivation grown in you? So I guess the question of dream chasing for everyone, and in particular for astronauts. Maybe Claude, you can start us off with your experience about how your habits maybe and your motivation throughout the years have evolved to become what you've become. And maybe Avgoustos can tell us also on his side, coming from Greece, the conditions are perhaps not well designed for producing astronauts. It is not a country that is used to doing this. So both can, perhaps he can learn and I can learn also just for my own endeavors. Motivation versus discipline, I guess. What is your take on this?
Yeah, in fact, motivation and passion, these are things that you have in you, or you don't have them. You don't need to really cultivate that. It's there. It's something that if you have passion, you want to do something. I want to be part of exploration in astrophysics and in space. And it's not something that you need to work on. It comes out of you. And why, I have no idea. You know, I had early passion for the sky, for astrophysics, and for airplanes, and I cannot explain why. Some of it may comes from, in a way, genes, and some of it comes from the environment. I had a very positive environment in my family. My father was always telling me, do what you like to do, and but do it well, whatever the subject is, you know, whether it's studying butterflies or whether it's becoming a physicist or a medical doctor, whatever you want to do, but do it well. Excellence was a thing that my parents and my father in particular was always pushing forward. I had passion, and for me, it helped me being always happy in what I was doing. I wonder why I was paid for all of what I did in my life until now, whether it was as an aviator or whether it was as an astrophysicist or as an astronaut. I always had passion and huge pleasure doing it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. This is more of also life, I guess, advice for everyone, myself, the audience, and yes. So, Avgoustos, maybe do you have some of your own story, especially coming from Greece and going through the adversity of trying to become an astronaut in a minor country, at least in the field?
Of course. As I mentioned during my presentation, when I was a teenager, I was an athlete. So that means that I had to wake up 5:30 in the morning to go for swimming. And after the school, I had to do other 5 hours of training. That needs discipline and devotion to the purpose to become better and better and to be competitive. This is the same feeling that I feel when I'm thinking about a possible astronaut career. I'm not an astronaut. I hope to become an astronaut in the future. Because here in Greece, there's not a lot of chances. You said that it's a small country with no human spaceflight program. And until now, there's no any Greek astronaut for European Space Agency. So to become an astronaut in Greece, there are 2 options. The first one is via European Space Agency, and the second one, which is a new one, and I'm trying to take my chance there, is with private companies. So I tried I'm trying to prove myself that I'm going to be a better version of myself every day, that I'm going to achieve all my goals step by step. For a Greek, it's very difficult to become an astronaut, and this is my goal. And I don't know if I will ever be in space. I hope so. I'm trying for it, but until now, I'm very happy and for myself, and I'm trying every day to become better and better and to improve my skills. That's why now I'm pilot in training, and I'm a scuba diver. Also, I'm trying to learn Russian. I'm trying to improve all my skills, so to take my chance to go in space one day. So this is I think that the most important factor is to stay devoted and to become better and better, and not to be stable during your life because of you have found a good job with a good salary. Yes, you have to think that each year you have to achieve your goals and to become a better version of yourself. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your insights. One more question we had was about actually missing something about the missions you did. What was the version you felt coming back from the space shuttle after your final space shuttle mission? Did you know it was the final one, or what did you actually miss from these missions, and what did you think of? Specifically, they say, what's the first thing you did after coming back? So how do you look at the future once you know your final mission has been finished, Claude?
Well, when we were coming back from a mission, we were coming back from a very sterile environment. You know, the inside of the space shuttle was pretty much like a hospital, and the International Space Station is maybe a little more messy because you have a lot of storage everywhere. You have seen pictures, but shell was very sterile, and I was looking forward to go and run in the forest and listen to the birds and have the smell of the forest. That's one thing. Then I wanted to drink a beer. And I wanted to have fajitas, go to a Mexican restaurant in Houston and have normal food, not the food that had been dehydrated that you rehydrate. So these little things were things that I was missing. But of course, it was not a huge problem because the missions were relatively short. But things of life like this, the smell of forest, drinking a beer with friends, and having special foods away from this dehydrated food we had, which was quite good, but still there was some special food that I was missing, and I was happy to see them again, get them again.
Yeah, and in the mission itself, did you, coming back on Earth, did you miss something from the mission itself?
Yeah, of course. The worst day of the mission, again, they were a short mission, typically 12 days. The worst was the last day when we had to come back. Of course, you want to stay longer than 2 weeks. For the one who stayed for 6 months, they say 6 months is quite long, and the one who stayed for 1 year, they say that 1 year is really long, and that's why Scott Kelly wrote this book, Endurance. 1 year in space is hard. 6 months is quite long. 2 weeks is too short. That's the way I would summarize.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay. And you have, Avgoustos, maybe do you miss something from the simulations you've done?
Yeah, I will agree with Claude that after the simulation, the thing that missed me most was the food. It's difficult to eat for freeze-dried food for 2 weeks. During my first mission, and in correlation with the exercise, I lost 4 kilos in 2 weeks and 2.5 kilos of muscle mass. So it was something exhausted for me. So when mission ended, I was in Poland. The first thing that I ate was a Greek salad, and this was the tastiest, the best Greek salad I have ever ate in my life, because it was the first real food, fresh food that I ate after 2 weeks of freeze-dried food. So yeah, for me the food it's a thing that missed me most during the isolation mission.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and a personality question, maybe. Claude, maybe you can tell us, after returning from your missions, what were the biggest changes you noticed in yourself, as perhaps as a person, or something changed in you when you came back from these missions? Was it the case?
Yeah, a space mission is a huge and wonderful personal experience, and for me, the most striking thing was the awareness that you gain over the Earth, the humanity on this big spaceship that planet Earth is, with 7.8 billion crew members, and you are looking at this from outside, and looking at the Earth like a celestial body. Of course, you can only do it when you are outside of it, and you don't have the experience when you're in an airplane because you are still too close to Earth. But being really outside of this envelope of a gas, the atmosphere that surrounds the Earth, makes you aware of a lot of things, and you realize how fragile our habitat is, and how confined we are. In fact, humanity that is stuck on the surface of the Earth, having to take care of it so it doesn't develop into something ugly over the next few decades and centuries because of our own fault. So awareness is something that is really the main thing that you learn after coming back from space. Awareness about the fragility and the very special condition that we have, humanity on the surface of this small and fragile celestial body. I also came back with the very positive thing about the value of teamwork in order to accomplish big goals in space. Fixing Hubble, especially the first time when we had this big problem, before going there, I was wondering, are we going to be able to make it? And I was not the only one among the crew members of this first mission to doubt that we could really make it. But with the on one hand, the huge motivation, the quality of the training, the support we had from the ground to accomplish this, we're able to make it. So I came with the realization of a thing that you can do if you have motivation, you work as a team, and you are properly trained. And that was something that I learned that was a wonderful and very positive thing. So awareness on one hand, and a realization that you can do big things if you work as a team and have the motivation to do it.
Okay, yes, it is a recurring thought that seeing the planet and all these stars, you know, they just put a perspective on humanity and the small trivialities that we shouldn't be worrying when you see the whole thing as a whole. Do you have maybe a comment to add to this, Avgoustos? Perhaps from your simulations, how did you feel? Yeah. But before, after of Avgoustos going through these simulations?
Yeah, the only thing that I can say about the simulations is that after the simulation missions, I returned more passionate and devoted to continue the hard work. But the overview effect that Professor Nicollier described before, and the feeling of when you realize that the Earth is just a blue spot on space, and the way that your perspective stays during a space flight, it's for me one of the major reasons that I want to become an astronaut and to go to space. Yeah, I think that this changes everything you believe or you think about the nature and how to behave the nature, and you return with more respect. And this feeling I want to feel in the future in space during a space mission.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it seems like our moderator has already told us the last questions we have here. It's focused to you, Claude, and it's also with relation to Avgoustos for astronaut careers. What would be your message for next generation astronauts like Avgoustos?
Well, have passion and motivation. That's a big thing. And I think Agostino has it, and all the ones who want to do this job, they have to have this spark and passion and motivation. The second point would be take good care of yourself and of your colleagues and friends and family. Take care of yourself and the people around you. And the third point would be train. Use every opportunity to learn new things that are related to the accomplishment of the mission, and try to reach levels of excellence. It's not always possible. I by far not pretend that I could reach this level of excellence, but always try to reach excellence. So the motivation, take care of yourself and of your fellow crew members, train, learn new things, and try to reach levels of excellence. These are the three messages that I would give.
Okay. Thank you very much. And it seems we just had a very last question coming here. I think it's also for you, Claude. I don't know if Gutinos can add to it, but it's more for the audience, I guess. How can we best get in touch with space-related programs, events, industries in Switzerland? I would say, you know, as a student, there's many student organizations, rocket teams and so on that have been on my own, and then events you can attend like Future of Space and all these. But what is your take on somebody who wants to get close to airspace in Switzerland, Claude?
Well, I personally follow a lot of the space news, and you have the website of NASA, the European Space Agency, which are very well done. And of course, nearly all of the activities, space activities in Switzerland are activities that are related to ESA, you know, because we don't have our own space agency. We are one of the member states of ESA, a relatively small member state, but very respected and very productive. And I follow very closely what ESA does and NASA does. And of course, what specifically the Swiss space industries do, you don't have a lot of detailed information when you follow the ESA program. But for instance, CHEOPS is a very very interesting program studying exoplanets using this small spacecraft that was born in Switzerland with the University of Bern and University of Geneva, with a lot of a contribution of the aerospace industry here in Switzerland. And I go mainly through the NASA and ESA websites. And of course, being at the Swiss Space Center, I get a lot of direct information about the activities in Switzerland related to space and the contribution of the Swiss aerospace industry to the space program.
Okay, thanks. So it seems like we've exhausted the options. The moderator is thanking you already. It's been a very instructive session for all of us. We really hope people have learned interesting stories from astronauts and how they can use their advice to apply it to their day-to-day lockdown life. So usually we have, in an usual event, you have questions coming after individually to the panelists, but due to the nature of our event here, there's not going to be anything else to ask for the audience to the panelists. So this will wrap it up. So again, thanks for being here. Claude, we always do the best for the following. And you can always please follow Avgoustos and Avgoustos in his social media pages. Please help him for his endeavor. Of course, Claude, yeah. One last thing we can mention is about this mentorship plan. I don't know if you want to mention something about it.
About what?
The mentorship plan you had, perhaps.
Mentorship plan, yes. Well, there will be soon a new selection of astronauts at ESA. And of course, all the citizens, men and women of all the member states of ESA, we have 22 member states, including Greece and Switzerland for the small countries. And, any citizen of these member states having had the proper level education in the sciences or engineering or medical and who is in a good physical shape and mental stability can apply. I don't have the details about this application, but I would be ready to give some mentoring and give some advice to the ones who would be interested to listen to my own story and my own advice. I don't know exactly how we will do this, but again, I'd be ready and more than willing to coach anybody who would like to get some advice from me. Again, I don't know exactly how we'll be doing this, but somehow we need to do this within the next few months. I think if you enter this selection with already the proper mindset, how to maximize the likelihood that you will succeed, you're already on a good footstep. And I think it would be a pity not to use this opportunity to interact with these potential candidates. I'd be willing to do this in a form that is still to be defined.
Okay. So thanks very much for this valuable information. Avgoustos, did you have anything to add before? Did I cut you, or is it all good now?
Yes, I would like to provide to our audience with that I was very lucky to be selected by the first private company that recruits and selects career astronaut candidates to participate in suborbital flights. And who constitutes the crew members for the first future commercial space flights. The company is called Advancing X, and the call for 2020 is still open. So everyone can Google the career astronaut competition and can find all the requirements that are needed to take a chance to go in space. So try it. You never know what's going to happen in the future.
Okay, thanks. So thanks again also to Professor Nicollier, who's offering to help eventual candidates in the future. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for anyone who is interested in taking this most selective, I guess, career path. So just to conclude this talk, I would like to thank again very much the audience, but also the associations, and in particular the organizing committee. In the likes of Roman, Miguel, Rashmi, Eric, Evita, Argiro also for this nice logo design. Anastasia, thank you very much. And all the VSCTH Association, AVETH, MeWell. Thanks, Miguel, again for the moderation. And of course, a huge thanks to Professor Nicollier, who took time out of his schedule for this talk and to inspire people of the next generation to work on themselves and provide us advice on the current historic, I guess, pandemic that we're living through today. And of course, the same goes for Avgoustos. Thanks a lot for your involvement here, and we sincerely hope that you are in the right path for the achievement of your endeavors, and wish you the best of luck in doing that. So if there are no comments to make anymore, I think we can slowly close this panel. Thank you very much for joining us again. I hope the audience also enjoyed it. And we do hope to see you in the future in one of our events.
Well, thanks to you, Soteris, for an excellent moderation of the event. That was very good, and good luck to Augusto to make it to space.
Thank you very much, Soteris. I think that I learned a lot of things today from you, Professor, and I promise that I will do my best to achieve my endeavors and my final goal. And I hope that I will have a chance to become an astronaut in the future. And of course, I will apply for the European Space Agency call later this year.
Good luck.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
It's been a great time to have both of you. Thanks a lot. And I think we can close now. So the YouTube live stream can go. Goodbye. Thank you very much, Professor.
Bye-bye. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you.